So with no further ado, he's very well known, he's famous, but I'm pleased to call him my friend, Dr. David Perlmutter.
What can I say but thank you? At the dinner last night, a woman stood up and said that she knew this day would come, and this day has come. I see you. We're going to be looking at what I do for a living, what I do with passion, and where my heart is and why I'm here today. I guess in summary, that's be my talk. But I'm going to define for you what is about medicine that I find interesting and why coming to know this product has been a very meaningful part of who I am today and where I think we're all going to go moving forward as we continue on this quest together. And I'm going to be presenting some very compelling clinical experiences of mine, and you'll understand from those clinical experiences what free radical biology is all about and why free radicals and this whole concept of oxidative stress is so fundamentally important in longevity, but also in dealing with the degenerative conditions that we all have, we're all at risk for. The fundamentals of all of the degenerative conditions that we deal with as physicians and that we're all fearful of as human beings are predicated on the two concepts of inflammation and as a result of inflammation, what we call oxidative stress. And for the first clinical vignette, I will call your attention to a woman that came to my office several years ago, very well-dressed woman, sat down across from me in my examining room, and I said, and she was wearing this kind of elegant hat. I said, well, why are you here today? And she took her hat off, and on top of her head was a frog. And I said, well, how did this begin? And the frog said it started off as a wart on my rear end. So with that as perspective, I'm going to recognize that when we're dealing with these diseases, that inflammation and then the downstream effects of inflammation, oxidative stress, the creation of free radicals, whether we're dealing with pulmonary diseases or we're dealing with heart disease, these are inflammatory disorders. Just as sure as your knee becomes inflamed when it's arthritic, just as sure as your brain is inflamed if you have Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease. These are fundamentally inflammatory diseases of the body. And I kind of have the idea now that it's the final lecture of the day that you may have some clue as to what you can do with respect to reducing inflammation and oxidative stress in the body. Correct me if I'm wrong. We're going to focus a lot, however, on the brain today. Dr. Denham-Harman proposed that aging is a consequence of the action of these free radicals way back in 1956. And as David Brown mentioned, I was honored to receive the Denham-Harman Award in 2002, and I'm kind of grateful for that because I practice sometimes what some people would call complementary medicine, and in the United States, at least in those days, it wasn't universally thought of, it wasn't put at the place where it is now. Well, it turns out that we were right all along. It turns out that giving people antioxidants and changing their lifestyle factors to reduce oxidative stress is now absolutely front and center and fundamental to keeping people healthy, to extending their lifespan and reducing their risk for diseases that they fear the most, like cancer and like heart disease and Alzheimer's. So Dr. Denham-Harman was the pioneer of this whole idea, and this is way back in 1956. Look how long it's taken for this information to take hold. But we now recognize that inflammation is the cornerstone of so many of the diseases that we fear. I mean, on the cover of Time magazine. So we can choose by dealing with lifestyle factors to reduce inflammation, whether we'll end up with a healthy-looking brain that's on the left of my screen and a brain that's atrophied and degenerative, like I think it's on the right side of your screen as well. This is a great slide to give during a lunchtime presentation, I might add. And I have to tell you that years ago, and people say, well, why neurology? Why are you so interested in the brain? The interesting conversation we had at lunchtime today was we were talking about the brain and the mind and realizing that the mind is not just contained in this vault that we call our skull, but the mind is our entire beings. That the heart has an intelligence of its own, that every cell in your body has its own DNA that is a perfect mirror of every other cell in your body. So where do we end this concept of mind? But anyway, how did I get interested in the brain? And I remember back as a third-year medical student, University of Miami, we were just beginning our neurology rotation with Dr. Peretz-Scheinberg, who was a real, he was on a pedestal in terms of the research he had done with Alzheimer's. There was about 8 of us in a small room, and he looked at us, he said, what would happen if you woke up one morning and you suddenly noticed that your memory was poor and you weren't making good decisions, your judgment was poor? And the medical student next to me raised his hand and said that he would transfer to law school. Now, I'm never, sorry, David. David's back there going like that, Anyway. So we spend a lot of time in paying attention to who we are physically. We want to look really good. We dress up, we lose weight, we exercise, we do things to our faces and our hair. But the bottom line is, I think the message there was actually profound. What good is all that if your brain isn't working? And if your brain isn't working, your body's writing checks that your mind can't fill. So you've got to be along for the ride, because what happens when you suddenly realize that you're maybe one taco short of a combo platter mentally? You're not the sharpest knife in the drawer. My mission is to prevent brain disorder, to preserve brain function. And we preserve brain function by paying attention to the simple principles of reducing inflammation and reducing oxidative stress. We can visualize this concept on the right side of your screen. We can visualize what it looks like for a brain to be on fire. These are the immune cells, the microglia in the brain cells, in the brains of Alzheimer's patients. This is a graphic representation of the brain on fire, an inflamed brain. If you take non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, your risk for Alzheimer's is reduced by 60%, putting you at the 40th percentile. That's an anti-inflammatory approach. It's not obviously what I'm going to be talking about today. But those who have taken anti-inflammatory medications have a reduced risk of Alzheimer's, and the same thing with Parkinson's. If you took anti-inflammatory drugs for a long period of time, your risk of Parkinson's is reduced by 45%. Now, this is published in the Archives of Neurology, and I'll tell you where that comes from. The Archives of Neurology is put out by a small group you've probably never heard of called the American Medical Association. They publish the Archives of Neurology that shows us that reducing inflammation reduces our risk for a disease for which there is no cure. So when I see a 48% risk reduction in people who have reduced inflammation in their lives, in their bodies, in their physiology, and I say it like that because you do need to reduce inflammation in your life, not just your physiology. That lifestyle factors, relationships that have gone sour, emotional issues that are inflammatory. I can't hang out with that person. He inflames me. She inflames me. Those relationships create the same inflammatory chemicals in your body just as sure as if you have arthritis. So it's not just taking the right nutritional supplements or modifying your diet. It's a lifestyle change that can really help you manifest this longevity issue that we're talking about and make you resistant to disease. So when I see a patient suffering from Parkinson's, I don't look upon this patient as needing this particular drug. The drugs that patients are given for Parkinson's treat the symptoms of Parkinson's. But that's all they do. They treat the smoke, but they don't treat the fire. And I say to my patients, well, do you realize that the Mirapex or the Staliva that you're taking isn't treating your Parkinson's disease? And they look, well, Parkinson's patients generally don't look really surprised, but they look at you and they say, what do you mean by that? Gosh, did I go to the wrong doctor? Are you a urologist, not a neurologist? No. And I say, no, you're treating your symptoms, but you're not treating the underlying problem, and that's half the battle. Now, here is the original description of Parkinson's. A person is benched over, crouched over the head and the staring eyes, low back, and we like to ascribe this original, the very first description of Parkinson's to Dr. James Parkinson, who wrote about this in 1817. But in reality, this was a description from the Neijing from the 4th century BC, where they described Parkinson's disease as coming from the liver, the source of inflammation, the source of fire in human physiology. So back in the 4th century BC, they recognized primarily that how interesting this is, that it's an inflammatory disorder And we now recognize, the latest studies in Parkinson's recognize that the failure of the liver to detoxify toxins to which we are exposed is a key player in increasing a person's risk. Well, what can we do as acting clinicians to better treat our patients to reduce inflammation? Here is the first key to the kingdom. The first key to the kingdom is something called the NRF2 pathway. And this will be on the quiz, so you better get this down. Just like you need to know where the double bonds are in the next thing I show you. Anyhow, the NRF2 pathway is simply the gateway to unlocking the genes to turn on the production of inflammation-reducing chemistry and antioxidant chemistry. That's all it is. Is that all it is? That's pretty profound. These are the keys to the kingdom. You must understand the importance of what's called the NRF2 pathway, because when the NRF2 pathway is activated, it actually speaks to your DNA. It turns on your DNA's ability to make inflammation-reducing chemicals and free radical-reducing chemicals. And that is pretty profound. How on earth could you activate your genes? You could actually turn on the genes. We're going to explore that. I kind of have a feeling that you have some clues. In the lower left of your screen is, again, an Alzheimer's disease brain looking at the inflammation, the brain on fire. What we're imaging in this sequence is using what's called the Pittsburgh compound, and they're able to image in the human brain, while you are alive, the presence of a specific protein called amyloid. In the Alzheimer's brain, amyloid is the protein that accumulates that and turns on the whole cascade of inflammation. And the reason I show you this chemical, amyloid, this protein, is because this is what the amyloid protein looks like. What amyloid does is it attracts to it these microglial cells, or the inflammatory cells, and they play the fundamental role in turning on inflammation, creating chemicals called the inflammatory cytokines. This is the cornerstone of Alzheimer's disease, as it is for Parkinson's disease. Now, I'm spending a lot of time talking about Alzheimer's disease, and I'm doing that because I know it's important to all of you, because if you live to be age 85, and probably many of you and most of you will, if you're taking your Protandim, I would venture to say, if you live to be age 85, the standard American has a risk of Alzheimer's of 50%. That's the flip of a coin. And that's profound. And you might determine, well, you might ask yourself, what is my risk of developing Alzheimer's? And one of the first things that goes is something called multitasking. So we're going to do a little examination on you right now. You're all patients now. You've all signed your consent. And here's the examination. I want you to sit with your feet, legs uncrossed, and I want everybody to take their right foot and rotate it in a clockwise way. And at the same time, draw the number 6. Now, did anyone's foot reverse direction? All right. So we'll see. I'll see you after class. We'll talk. Here is brand new technology for dealing with inflammation. This was just described. This is pretty exciting. This was just described 3,000 years ago. It's brand new. It's called turmeric, and this is what gives mustard its golden color. This is what when you have curried something, that's the spice that is used, or curcumin. And what turmeric has a unique ability to do, as demonstrated by study after study, here a study from UCLA, is in the laboratory animal, it reduces the formation of amyloid protein, the key protein for inflammation in the Alzheimer's brain. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting to note that in India, where they eat a lot of curried foods, the risk of Alzheimer's disease is only 1/4 of what it is in the United States. Maybe there's a clue here based upon their diet. They eat a lot of curry. WebMD, the study shows us there's no side effects of taking a lot of turmeric. And interestingly, if you look at the damage to protein by free radicals before and after you treat a laboratory animal, in an untreated group, this is an Alzheimer's laboratory animal, they develop a lot of what are called hippocampal carbonyls, and that's a fancy way of saying protein damaged by free radicals. But if they're treated with curcumin or turmeric, the amount of damage by free radicals of their protein is significantly reduced. It lowers protein oxidative damage. That's why we're here today. And it actually reduced the formation of this amyloid plaque by almost 50%. Untreated versus treated, looking at the amount of amyloid plaque in the laboratory animal, profound. So again, in view of its efficacy, low toxicity, This spice shows promise for the prevention of Alzheimer's disease. Now that is a concept. Who talks about preventing Alzheimer's disease? John Kennedy, in his inaugural address, said that the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. And I would submit to you that in everybody we deal with in our daily lives, we need to inculcate that knowledge into their brains, that you're healthy now, let's keep it that way. And the keys to remaining healthy are reducing free radical-mediated activity and reducing inflammation. And here's a way. Here's turmeric, here's curry. It's been around for 3,000 years. It reversed cognitive deficits in laboratory animals. They took animals that were rendered demented. I don't know, they parked them in front of Jerry Springer reruns or they did something to them. And then the rats, I don't know how do you determine that a laboratory rat is demented? I don't know the answer to that question. But when giving them curcumin and something called DHA, which we're going to look at in just a minute, their cognitive deficits were reversed. Well, you might say to yourself then, I'm genetically destined to have Alzheimer's or heart disease or diabetes or you name it. We're now talking about not genetic determination anymore, but genetic predisposition. So you may have inherited the so-called APOE4, an Alzheimer's gene. Does that mean you're going to get Alzheimer's? Well, the teaching has been thus far in neuroscience that if you carry the APOE4 gene, your risk of Alzheimer's goes up 500%. But interestingly, a recent report showed that those individuals who had the highest level of beta-carotene in their blood had a reduced risk of Alzheimer's by about 89%, just by having one antioxidant in their system. What does this tell us? It tells us that we are now able to rewrite our genetic destiny. That just because we happen to carry a specific allele that may not be favorable, is that going to determine our outcome? No. We know that there's this nature versus nurture argument that's been going on for years. Are we just at the mercy of our DNA, or are we the product of our environment? Are we our nature or our nurture? But you now fully understand that we are the representation of a beautiful dance, a dance between our DNA, our legacy, and those situations over which we have control, our lifestyle factors. Because our lifestyle factors affect our DNA, the expression of our DNA. So what is this oxidative stress that you've been hearing so much about? Dr. McCord talked to you about that this morning very eloquently. If you take an apple, chop it in half, and put it on the countertop, in an hour you come back, what does it look like? It's brown. That's oxidative stress. If you take a pomegranate and chop it in half and put it on the counter, it will stay there for a week without turning brown because it has higher levels of antioxidants. Well, we want to have the highest level of antioxidant protection we can so we don't look like that car. This report simply shows us that oxidative damage to proteins, DNA, and RNA is associated with mild cognitive impairment, and they're saying that this oxidative damage is an early event in the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease and can serve as a therapeutic target to slow the progression or perhaps the onset of the disease. Targeting oxidative stress might keep you from getting Alzheimer's disease, according to the American Medical Association. But there's nothing pharmaceutical out there, so that's where it ends. Their call, the American Medical Association calls to me as a clinician reading the journal Archives of Neurology and says, we need, what is the first two words? Better antioxidants. You bet. And here's how we measure antioxidants in, for example, Alzheimer's. Here's the proof. Here is the proof that the Alzheimer's brain is a brain in which antioxidant function is compromised. Person dies of Alzheimer's, they look at the brain, they measure what are called T-bars, and T-bars are a measure of oxidative damage to fat. And if you look at the Alzheimer's brain versus control, people who died with other illnesses, the amount of free radical damage to the brain of the Alzheimer's patients is profound. And you would say, well, perhaps they don't have as good of antioxidant protection as the controls, and you would be right. Because if you look at the Alzheimer's patients versus control, across the board in the antioxidants, they are deficient. So this all comes together as a very neat package. Their brains are damaged by free radicals, and their antioxidant protection is compromised. This is a disease that is currently affecting 5.5 million Americans, for which we are spending $156 billion each year to treat. And it doesn't measure, there's no measure of the heartache that's involved in Alzheimer's patients. There's no measure of the heartache that's involved in clinicians who are treating patients and in the family members of those who suffer from this disease. And I can tell you on both counts that it's difficult. But here's what we're told to do. We're told to provide medication. She sees it as a bedtime story. I'm not sure which of them sees it as a bedtime story, frankly. But nonetheless, we're told really live your life come what may, and then when you finally find that you're just not firing on all cylinders, there's a magic pill for you, and it's called Aricept. We've heard of Aricept. You see it advertised on the evening news. Well, let's take a look at because I stand before you today offering you the science. Everything I've said to you thus far, and will continue to say, is these are just quotations from the journals. And here is the scientific support for Aricept and all the drugs in that class, published in the British Medical Journal, where they looked at every peer-reviewed, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial of that class of drugs, which are called cholinesterase inhibitors. And they reviewed all the published studies of drugs like Aricept, and their conclusion was that because of flawed methods and small clinical benefits, the scientific basis for recommendations of these drugs is questionable. And beyond that, what doctors are told is that recommendations for the use of cholinesterase inhibitors do not seem to be evidence-based. Now, I don't make it up. That is a quote from the British Medical Journal. When you keep that in mind, you'll recognize that this is what we are, as doctors, told to do, and it's forcing the issue, isn't it? It's forcing it down your throat as if this is the only treatment protocol that we can engage ourselves in, and we forget about this concept of disease prevention. The FDA approves donepezil for severe dementia, but the experts wonder why, because the experts read the literature. But U.S. News and World Report says the new face of Alzheimer's, what you can do to push for a cure. Well, I'm all for that. But I'm more interested in what we can do to prevent that illness. I really, really am. Because the tools are there, and the information is there, and it just needs to get out. So we're talking about this whole idea of NRF2 activation and how profound that is, because what NRF2 activation does is it reduces inflammation and it increases antioxidant function. And how do we activate the NRF2 pathway? And this is how we do it. This is the beauty of Protandim. And David Brown talked to you a little while ago about what went on between him and me. And it was a profound moment in my life. I was being courted by, I didn't tell him, but there were actually several other companies at the time who offered products that they claimed would do this and that. And I said, show me the information. I want the data, because the time will come when I will stand before you and I will have to defend this product or that product, because I'm going to defend it based upon the peer-reviewed science, based upon the published literature that shows that it does what you say it does. We reviewed the work of Dr. McCord, and I will tell you, as a clinician in dealing with patients and reading the literature, to be able to be interacting with the man who discovered superoxide dismutase, maybe that doesn't mean much to you, but to me, I live and breathe SOD and catalase and glutathione and NRF2 pathway, and it's very, very humbling. It's a big honor, and it's very, very exciting to think that we're going to take what Dr. McCord has discovered and brought to this planet and now apply it to people for health and longevity. So you've got to understand this pathway. This is the fundamental about Protandim. Again, remember T-bars. I showed you this earlier. T-bars are the measurement of fat damage, not just in the brain, but anywhere in the body. Well, let's just take a look at Protandim. Protandim, in peer-reviewed studies published in the journal Free Radical Biology and Medicine, which to me is one of the most well-respected journals on the planet, look what this does. In human subjects, T-bars, reduces the oxidative damage to fat. So this is the beauty of this product, is it reduces the oxidative damage to fat. This is fundamental. Now, your brain is 70% fat. I'm not picking on you. I'm everybody here. Not just your brain. It's a good thing, though. So if your brain is 70% fat, then you really are at risk for damage to fat, because fat is really at risk for being damaged by free radicals. And the brain, crazy as it may be, has probably the worst antioxidant protection in the human physiology. He's saying, put that down, you fool, it's a bone of contention. You're right, it is. Well, where do these free radicals come from anyway, and why do we need to protect ourselves against them? Free radicals are generated by the utilization of fuel in every one of your cells. as you metabolize carbohydrates into carbon dioxide and water, you produce in that process in what are called the mitochondria. These are mitochondria. These are the energy packets, the energy factories within each one of our cells. And as you do that, you create one, I don't mean to be too technical, but at the end of the day, there's an electron that floats around. And that electron normally binds to oxygen. That's why we have to breathe, because we've got to get rid of that free electron. Oxygen takes it, and by the grace of God, we exhale carbon dioxide, and that's the acceptor of the electron, and we're protected. But some of those electrons don't make it through that pathway and are free electrons that then form these chemicals called free radicals. And they damage fat, they damage protein, and fundamentally what's really worrisome is they damage our DNA. But these are the mitochondria. This is the source of the free radicals. But interestingly enough, it's also where we produce energy. And these mitochondria are within each of our cells and are really quite beautiful things. This is inside a mitochondria. The round thing you see is the DNA of the mitochondria. And the DNA of the mitochondria is totally foreign to your body in one sense. It's not the DNA that you're so used to talking about. It's not the human genome that was sequenced by Dr. Craig Venter, for which he received the Nobel Prize. It's totally unique. These guys live, these girls actually, they are, live within each of our cells. In the human egg, the ovum, there are over 100,000 mitochondria. And the sperm only have 15 mitochondria, interestingly. And the mitochondria in every one of our cells is only derived from our mothers. It is the maternal legacy. And in my opinion, it is the embodiment of feminine energy. It's the embodiment of healing. And, you know, the approach that we take to medicine these days is unfortunately a very masculine approach. We're fighting the war on cancer. We're developing new weapons to combat this and that and beat this disease and beat that disease. Whereas we've got to recognize that the nurturing, healing, feminine approach to health is really where it's at. It's really what keeps us healthy. And this is the gift. We can look at mitochondria in a living cell. They're the green things, and they're thought to have represented the bacteria that invaded these what are called eukaryotic cells 4 million years ago. They now live within each of our cells. They carry their own DNA. They instruct nuclear DNA, whether that cell will live or die. The mitochondria are exquisitely sensitive to the very free radicals that they produce. Their antioxidant protection is minimal. But they hold the sword as to whether that cell will live or die. They hold the sword of Damocles over the nuclear DNA to control whether that cell survives or not. And this is the most profound aspect of antioxidant protection that I can think of. So in that sense, whatever we do to reduce inflammation, and more importantly, whatever we do to quench these damaging free radicals, is applying and recognizing and giving thanks to the feminine energy. So here these mitochondria are, and we look at what is called the brain's master antioxidant. Perhaps you've heard of glutathione. I've heard a little bit about glutathione over the years. And it is not only the fundamental brain antioxidant, but it also plays a key role in liver detoxification. So what seemingly disparate functions of this chemical, but indeed these are profound in terms of our health and longevity. So let's first take a look at it in terms of its antioxidant function. And glutathione, in Parkinson's, for example, if you look at a Parkinson's brain in a person after they have died, that's probably when you'd want to start taking their brain apart, they have decreased levels of glutathione, as you might expect. And so we, over the years, have been looking at how do we increase glutathione? Well, there's something called lipoic acid, there's NAC, glutamine, you can give oral glutathione, reducing the challenge of poisons, reducing drugs that might reduce glutathione, or giving other antioxidants that might allow glutathione to act longer, or even increase the production by giving milk thistle. Giving milk thistle to increase the production of glutathione. What a concept. No one really understood how that happened until Dr. McCord started publishing articles about the NRF2 pathway. The other thing about glutathione that you really must understand, it plays a key role in liver detoxification, and we live in a very toxic world. You've got to understand now that we're talking about anti-inflammatory activity and antioxidant activity about Protandim, but in the course of turning on glutathione, we are turning on the body's ability to deal with the toxins that are so ubiquitous in our environment. So let's look at why that's important. We've known that if you have a history of occupational exposure to herbicides, that your risk of Parkinson's is increased 300%. And that's not news. It's 1992. It's just old news. This came out in Medscape, exposure to pesticides linked to risk for Parkinson's disease. JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, in 2000 said that if you were even using pesticides in your garden, that you increased your risk of Parkinson's disease. But here's what they said in the year 2000 that was so interesting, so intriguing. Not everybody who uses these pesticides in their gardens will get Parkinson's disease. What they're saying, some people have a genetic risk that increases their vulnerability. And this was published in 2001, in June of 2001. And then again, we found way back in 1998, as they say, the susceptibility of some people to Parkinsonism-inducing effects of some pesticides might be genetic. Well, I wrote a letter in 1997, 1 year before that, and this was published in the Townsend Letter for Doctors. Individuals with genetic defects causing detoxification problems can develop Parkinson's as a result of exposure to what are called xenobiotic chemicals that are neurotoxic. The point is, you don't have much say in where they put the diving board on your gene pool, if you know what I mean, but you do have a lot to say about how you express those genes and about what you can do to offset some of your genetic predispositions. And it reminds me of an interesting experience I had recently in my office when, well, let me just get to this for just a moment. It's the same thing with Lou Gehrig's disease, that pesticide exposure is dramatically associated with developing Lou Gehrig's disease. And I can tell you that as a clinician who deals with patients suffering from ALS with Lou Gehrig's disease, you want to do the very best that you can because there's nothing out there to help them. We know that it's because they cannot detoxify things and that the free radicals in their body are on fire, are just destroying their nervous system. So we look to things that can increase antioxidant activity. And again, this is a powerful tool that I now have that can actually turn on the genes to increase antioxidant protection. This is the fundamental. So, glutathione, it's fundamentally important. And where's the science for Protandim and glutathione? Well, here's a report that Dr. McCord published showing dramatic increase in human brain tumor cells with administration of glutathione. This takes my breath away in recognizing that the fundamentals of those diseases are deficiencies of glutathione. Well, we talked about this NRF2 pathway, and this is another one of the studies that Dr. McCord did showing that, interestingly enough, the ashwagandha, the A, the B, the bacopa, the G, what's the G? Green tea, good. The S, silymarin, and what's the C? Curcumin, good. That these things all increase NRF2 activation to a certain degree, but when they're added together in the unique formulation, it is profound. It's a profound increase in NRF2 activation. And why is that important for me in dealing with patients who have ALS? This report tells us that NRF2 activation protects neurodegeneration in the mouse model of Lou Gehrig's disease. And this work came to us, we're going to see where it came to us in a moment, but that motor neuron protection, protecting those cells from dying, in the ALS model of ALS in rats depended upon, and the bottom line, the increased production of glutathione. Protected these laboratory animals from worse degeneration by turning on their glutathione system activated by the NRF2 pathway. It's a really wonderful work done by Dr. Jeffrey Johnson. Very, very well-respected researcher in this whole NRF2 pathway understanding. What he said was really quite profound. Based on these findings, or this is what they said about him, speculates it may be possible within the next 3 to 5 years to transplant cells containing this NRF2 protein into the human brain. At the end of the day, he says, he's searching for a molecule that could activate the normal NRF2 pathway in human cells and that could be delivered in the form of a pill. Amen. I know where you can do that. It's there. It's available now. So things that increase brain inflammation. We're getting into the lifestyle part of the talk now, everyone. And here we go. Sorry if this is... We've got to pay attention to body fat. And why? Because body fat is not just storage of calories for the winter, but it is an inflammatory tissue. The more body fat you have, the more inflammation chemicals you produce, the more you have to pay attention to factors to reduce inflammation. This puts these two magazine covers right together and forming a really interesting continuum. Fat increases inflammation. Inflammation increases your risk of degenerative disease. If you go up to somebody and measure their tricep skin fold, hopefully with their permission, and you come back, you know what tricep skin fold measurements are? They take a caliper and they measure how much fat in your triceps. And you look at this population 30 years later, you find that those who had the highest fat in their triceps were at a dramatic increased risk for Parkinson's, almost 300% increase, because they have fat, which increases inflammation. But it's also these dopamine, this neurotoxin that you accumulate if, in fact, you maintain body fat. And I don't know what this cartoon is supposed to look like, but I used to say, I guess he's lost weight now, but I'm really happy that my wife became Secretary of State. Nonetheless. Oh, I got to watch it. I have to watch it. I'm giving him a compliment. He lost a lot of weight. Anyway. If you look at the amount of brain atrophy that you get and plot it against how much belly fat you have, the fatter you are, the smaller your brain. End of story. And that's what this study shows. And thank you for laughing. Isn't it funny? If you're obese in midlife, your risk of Alzheimer's increases by about 300%. And moment to moment, if you're overweight, your ability to retain digits, your functional memory, moment to moment, is compromised. This is a study that compared body mass index, I believe, yes, and how many digits you could recall after a period of time. Because your brain is on fire. The more body fat that you have, it creates static on the line. You can't receive your brain's signals. I'll read for you. To help his patients know that they need to make lifestyle changes, Dr. Frank has them pose with one foot in a mock grave. Well, here's another issue that affects inflammation, and that is food allergies. And in this case, very specifically, celiac disease or sensitivity, allergy to wheat, but specifically gluten, found in wheat, barley, and rye. And the studies are now showing that that if you are gluten sensitive and you are consuming foods that contain gluten, that your brain will shrink because it increases inflammation. Now, what percentage of us suffer from celiac disease? Never heard of celiac disease. It sounds like something, horrible, and it is. But 1%, really more than 1% of humanity suffers from this disease, making it the most common disease on the planet. And these are the kinds of changes that occur in the brain. These big white areas shouldn't be there. That's inflammation in the brain. And as they say in Clinical Neurology News, I'll tell you an interesting story about that in just a moment. Celiac disease may atrophy the brain. It turns on inflammation. You should ask yourself today, what do I need to do to reduce inflammation? That is the cornerstone of degenerative diseases. Just like the heart, just like the brain, just like the diabetes from the pancreas. I always used to, my wife will tell you that I oftentimes read this Clinical Neurology News and it's so focused on drugs. And I said, I bet you I will never see the day that Clinical Neurology News is going to publish anything about nutritional supplements. A week later, they called me and interviewed me out of the blue for an article about nutritional supplements. I was overwhelmed, and I thought, these things are just starting to happen. And it's a really wonderful time. It's opening up. It's like watching people wear green in Iran. It's a great time right now. It's a wonderful time. This glass is half full. Absolutely. We're going to better and better times, I choose to believe. Well, let's talk about what happens to kids whose brains are inflamed. He's 4 years old. He's told that he has attention deficit disorder. And interesting, the parents stated to me, well, why are you here today? Well, our child is ADHD. I said, well, why are you here today? Our child is ADHD. Is there anything wrong with the way I just said that? Our child is ADHD. It's not he is a boy or he is my son. He is. It's of his essence. Not like I have diabetes or I broke my arm, but that's who he is. He is now ADHD. He shakes uncontrollably when frustrated. I still do that. He cannot stay on task. His anger outbursts, I've learned to control that. How personal should I get? I'm wondering. Well, I'll get personal. Okay, here we go. In our old house years ago, correct me if I'm wrong, I became frustrated one day, and I left the garage, the side door of the garage. I left where I punched a hole in it. I left it there to remind me about anger. So every time I go by this, I'm never going to lose my temper again. If I told you why I lost my temper, I think many of you would say, yeah, I understand. That makes sense. But anyway. So here's this kid. He's got lots of ear infections. He's, what is he, 4 years old or 6 years old? 4 years old. He's already been on naproxen. They put him on a 6-month course of antibiotics prophylactically to prevent him from getting sick because he got sick so much. He's a mouth breather, as you would expect if he's inflamed. He can't breathe through his nasal passages because they're all inflamed. But his neurologic examination is non-focal, except for the fact, and this is my very sophisticated test for ADHD, if they destroy the crinkly paper on the table. You know, if you're a doctor, there's two things. You have to write illegibly, and you have to have crinkly paper on that sticks to your bare butt when you sit down. And for some reason, these kids go for the crinkly paper, and they crunch it up, and I go crazy. Anyway. So he has ADHD, and he was diagnosed by a pediatrician who himself takes Ritalin. Nonetheless, we looked at a blood test called anti-gliadin antibody. It was positive, meaning he is wheat sensitive. We put him on probiotics. We put him on DHA. We took the sugar away from his diet and made him gluten-free. 2 weeks later, the teachers call the parents and say, thank you for medicating him because he's much calmer. 2.5 years later, I saw him again. He's able to start him in school as the youngest student in his class, able to excel in reading and math, and we do not anticipate any further problems with him being hyperactive. He's growing so fast, he's one of the tallest kids in his class. Celiac disease is present in 1.2% of Americans. It produces inflammation in the brain, and you may not have anything gastrointestinal. There are about 500,000 kids, if you look between less than 5 years to 11 years, there are about 500,000 kids who have celiac disease, and they don't know it, and it's inflaming their brains. They're not Ritalin deficient. This is not a situation of being Ritalin deficient. 66 to 70% of children with untreated celiac disease, ADHD, resolves when you put them on a gluten-free diet. This is a journal called Pediatrics. It's the most well-respected pediatric journal on the planet. This is what we want. This is the kid that we're looking for, and this is what we're told. This is a billboard. I'm kidding. It's not a billboard. Come on. But anyway, should we go back to those who are sleeping? No, it's not a billboard. Okay. Questions will get harder as we go on. That will be on the quiz, by the way. So we have this idea that we're going to tell our kids, all right, at 12 o'clock, go and have your pill, no big deal. But that stigmatizes these children. Everybody in the class knows why Johnny had to leave at 11:30 every day, 5 days a week. Why? Because he's taking or she's taking Ritalin or whatever the drug may be. And we ask ourselves, maybe we're asking too much of our children. Maybe we're driving them too fast. Well, this was published on Monday of last week. ADHD drugs linked to sudden death in kids. And what they did was they looked at, I think it's 534 children who died of sudden death. And they compared them to that same number of children who died from a known cause, like it was in this case an auto accident. And they found that the risk of those who died of sudden death for unknown causes, that they were taking a stimulant drug, was increased about 700%. And the FDA says, this is a limited study, don't pay much attention to it, that people should not stop their ADHD drugs. Well, let me go back for just a moment. What I'm going to show you now that we're all touchy-feely, is I'm going to show you my report card from first grade, okay? Now, I don't know how many of you saved your report cards from the first grade, but I happen to have mine. And this is from 1960 to 61. There's my date of birth for those who are keeping track. And a check indicates an area that needs improvement. Well, I got myself a lot of checks. I had so many checks that they actually added cafeteria to me. They didn't even have a place for that. I can assure you that had they had Ritalin, I would have been in the front of the line with Ritalin, but I probably would have been asking the school nurse, well, can you define the antagonistic effect of amphetamine production in children? Anyway, David is capable of better work if he would just settle down to more controlled behavior. A good message. Well, what are the missing pieces? Here's a powerful missing piece to the puzzle of brain inflammation, and it's this NRF2 therapeutic target against brain inflammation. That's the title of the study. Well, what do we do? well, maybe we can grow a new brain. And I don't have much time. Well, in terms of the lecture, I don't have much time left. I hope I have a lot of time left otherwise. And we can grow a new brain. Or parts of our brain can grow. Now, that is pretty darn exciting. When we reduce inflammation, reduce oxidative stress in the brain, we can grow new brain cells. And, you know, back in the day, correct me if I'm wrong, that people would tell you, whether you decided to drink beer or not, that every beer that you drank, you would lose 20,000 brain cells. Remember all that business? Well, if that were the case, one would wonder, would I be up here lecturing with the eloquence that I've managed to muster? Where was I? Oh, okay. I'm having fun. I want you to know I am enjoying the heck out of this. I really am. So, it's the first time I've ever given a talk without a laser pointer, so I don't know what to do with it truly, because they said the screens are in front of me, and I guess it's true. So, we can choose to have the brain on the left or choose to have the brain on the right. We can grow new brain cells. Human brain tissue in this study labeled with bromodeoxyuridine, or BRDU. This labels DNA while it's dividing. They've shown that in the memory center of your brain, you continue to grow new brain cells your whole life. You're growing stem cell therapy in your brain right now. Our study demonstrates cell genesis occurs in human brains throughout our lifetimes. And what's fundamental in that is this brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. This turns on the growth of new brain cells. These are what brain cells look like. They're labeled in red. These are when they're still what are called stem cells, and then they differentiate into full-blown neurons. And it happens throughout our lifetimes. You would say, what is it we can do to turn on the production of this brain-derived neurotrophic factor? And here are the factors. DHA, reducing calories, physical and mental exercise. Does calorie restriction affect your brain? This study was just published in January of this year. They had 50 people. They were healthy, 2 overweight, somewhere middle of overweight. And they restricted their calories only by 30% over a 3-month period. And they found that after 3 months of calorie restriction, their memory score skyrocketed. Because calorie restriction decreases free radical production. There's the tie-in. And calorie restriction decreases the formation of inflammatory mediators. Now, I am not telling you today that just take Protandim is going to be enough. Consider calorie restriction. Consider physical exercise. Why? Because physical exercise turns on BDNF and can help you grow brain cells. What's the payout? Exercise improves the mental function in adults at risk for dementia. We're all at risk for dementia, I can promise you. Effective physical activity, here's the actual study that compared to the control, those who actually exercise in the yellow, their mental performance increased after the trial, just having them exercise 20 minutes a day. In summary, this shows that 142 minutes of exercise per week, do the math, that's 20 minutes a day, has a modestly improved cognition relative to those who do not exercise. So I'm just saying exercise 20 minutes a day, key. The Nurses' Health Study showed that those nurses who exercise had read the last sentence, a 20% lower risk of cognitive impairment. Just physical exercise. What fits your busy schedule better, exercising 1 hour per day or being dead 24 hours a day? Well, what else turns on brain-derived neurotrophic factor, DHA? What is DHA? Docosahexaenoic acid. And you're gonna, I can promise you, you're gonna hear more about DHA. I mark my words. Can't say anything more, but DHA is what the reason we say fish is brain food. We now know that you can take in DHA by eating a lot of fish, but these days there's concern about that because of mercury and PCBs. There's also DHA that is derived from marine algae that's made from algae in a laboratory, a vegetarian source. And the Framingham study, you've heard of the Framingham heart study. That's where all the heart work was done to justify lowering your cholesterol. A 47% reduced risk of developing dementia of all causes in those people with the highest levels of DHA. If your DHA level is elevated, you're protecting your brain because DHA actually also speaks to your genes and turns on the genes to make brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Well, this is, in fact, the IQ gene, in my opinion. This is the gene that relates to brain function. And it's the fact that we can control our genes with foods and supplements that we take, I think, is really exciting information. I had the opportunity to speak to Ann Curry about this on the Today Show last year. And I have learned subsequently when I give these lectures that if I show the slide, I shouldn't wear that jacket because everybody, it's the first thing who said, he's wearing the same jacket. Anyway, so we talked about this concept that you can modify your genetic expression. And I want to tell you that this came to me, this concept came to me, and is supported by all the work, all the research that underlies why protandem is what it is. It came to me, I was instructed by this gentleman. And this is a shaman who lives in the highlands of Peru. And the traditions that he practices have been handed down for hundreds and hundreds of years from the Inca. And we took a tour of this area. And this was the actual Inca laboratory. This is where the Inca took soils from all across North, Central, and South America and cultivated various foods. And not only did they determine which soil is best to grow corn and the various crops, but they also recognized that certain foods had an effect on their warriors, that certain foods would cause them to be stronger, swifter, smarter, more resistant to disease, more able to heal from their injuries. And as you move further and further back from this laboratory created by the Incas hundreds of years ago, and it was vast, but when you finally stepped way back and were enthralled by how vast it was, you came to the realization that it was formed in the shape of a uterus. And again, it's honoring this feminine energy that comes from the earth. Look at every component of protandem comes from the earth, and it's given to us. It's a gift. The Inca understood this and developed this laboratory to honor that energy. And I had these profound thoughts at that point, thinking, oh, this is all come together. I thought, why did these thoughts come to mind? And the reason being is, when we were at 14,000 feet, they insisted that we chew coca leaves all day. And when you chew, I'm going to tell you right now, when you chew coca leaves all day, you get all kinds of thoughts. Boy, oh boy. Took me a week to figure that one out after I could stop chewing. Well, if indeed the foods that we eat are speaking to our genes, determining our health, then what are we doing today in our modern society? To figure out the answer to that question, I left the coca leaves at home and went to the grocery store to see what we're eating. In other words, how are we instructing our genes? I went to the grocery store and I saw this sign up in the sky, aisle 16, and it had something written that I thought was profound. It said, health foods. I thought, what a concept. Foods that are designed for your health. I mean, think about it. I'm not making it up. The question is, if they have in Publix market health foods, what is the rest of this stuff? Think about it. There are certain foods that are on a table, and recognize that food is more than protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And certainly it is on the grocery store shelf. Who knows what's in that stuff? There's a very interesting, wonderful book called Genetic Nutritioneering by a very close friend of mine, Dr. Jeffrey Bland. And he talks about food as being information, and indeed it is. Food is instructing our genes. It's controlling our genetic expression moment to moment. That is power. The foods that you consume, the supplements that you consume, are modifying your genes, what your genes are putting out in terms of protein, moment to moment. And it isn't just the foods that you consume. It's the water that you drink. It's the relationships you have with other people. It's every aspect of your life. It's listening to my words right now. I am affecting genetic expression. The relationships that you have with each other are affecting your DNA. You're not at the mercy of your DNA. You can cause life-giving, health-giving DNA to express itself any moment of your day. So this is how we're instructing our DNA. And I didn't ask that man to appear in the picture, but it's sort of perfect anyway. So we've got to emphasize maintenance of health, preventing disease. Because, well, the Neijing, the Yellow Emperor, stated that in the 4th century BC, that preventive medicine is the ultimate principle of wisdom. That to cure a disease after it has manifest is like digging a well when one feels thirsty or forging weapons when the war has already begun. And I would submit to you today that we've got to be more proactive about preventing illness, because a lot of times we do things that aren't so smart. Again, how does protandem work? It speaks to our genes through the NRF2 pathway and turns on the production of antioxidants and inflammation-reducing chemicals. And that is rich, and that is profound. I mentioned lifestyle. I mentioned attitude and having love in your heart. In a moment, I'm going to change slides, what I'm doing in a moment. The sisters expressing negative emotions do not live as long as those sisters conveying more positive ones: happiness, love, hope, gratitude, and contentment. Emotional states may play a role in determining cognitive function, really in determining any kind of function in your body. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Montel Williams, because Montel, and you know Montel has MS, and he is doing wonderfully. Montel personifies this whole mentality of getting the right attitude, having the right emotional position, and defining who you are and what's important in life. And you'll understand when you speak with him and he speaks with you what it's meant to him to gain control over a hand of cards that was dealt to him that wasn't perhaps the best hand of cards. And he's done it, and he embodies that, and I applaud him for it. It's such an honor to get to know him and to work with him. But before I do that, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to have spoken with you today. Thank you so much.